Dickinson of the East Marshall Street Well Oral History and Memorialization Project that we're here to talk about today. I'll offer a few remarks, and then Dr. Dickinson will offer some reflections. And again, I'm afraid I have to leave a little bit early because I have another meeting. But you should feel free to reach out to me directly if that would be useful. So to understand some of the context of our partnership, I'm going to provide a brief history of the East Marshall Street Well project, which I think probably many of you are already familiar with, but I think it might help if you're framing proposals to consider how to contextualize your own projects within broader histories. So during the 1994 construction of a VCU medical building, the remains of 53 people, mostly of African descent, were discovered in what became known as the East Marshall Street Well. And their cadavers had been stolen or obtained through the prison system, obtained through the prison system, stolen from their graves, used for research and education by faculty and staff at the institution that became VCU's medical center, and then discarded in the well. After a rushed excavation, VCU administrators sent the remains to the Smithsonian for storage and did not begin to address the implications of the discovery until Sean Utzi's 2011 film, Until the Well Runs Dry, drew renewed attention to the well. In 2013, VCU convened the East Marshall Street Well Project Planning Committee to determine how to respectfully return remains from the Smithsonian. The identities of the people whose remains had been excavated could not be determined. So through the planning committee, a group representing the descendant community, the Family Representative Council, or the FRC, symbolically representing their family, worked to create recommendations that reflect community priorities around the East Marshall Street Well. So here, I just wanted to give you a little bit of this background. Our project differs maybe from some other community engaged research in that Dr. Dickinson and I were brought into an existing project. And we started working in 2023 and started working very closely with FRC members to amplify their priorities around education and memorialization. So we met regularly with the FRC members who chaired the Interment and Memorialization Committee, and then the member who became the liaison for VCU for the FRC. And all of these FRC members are lifelong Richmond residents with deep roots in the community. And when we started working with them, they had already been involved with the East Marshall Street Well project for over a decade. And their work was entirely as volunteers. They all had full-time jobs. So I think it might be helpful for those of you, it might still be applicable for those of you, even if our integration into the project might follow a slightly different trajectory than yours. From the onset, we tried to be as mindful as possible about the limits of FRC members' energy and time, especially as some of them began to struggle with health issues. From 2023 to 24, the lab included 2 separately funded postdoctoral fellows who worked with Dr. Dickinson and me to help supervise graduate and undergraduate students as they learned more about the history of the East Marshall Street Well and about oral history methods. The fellows carried out some of the FRC priorities, including through the organization of the display of educational panels, the creation of a publicly available oral history repository and podcasts about the East Marshall Street Well, and as well as research into policies around the discovery of human remains. So the community engagement grant grew out of these prior conversations, often over shared meals, and we can provide details about just sort of like what it means to sort of build these kinds of connections later, if that would be helpful. And the expectation was that ongoing student involvement would enable the lab to expand our work even after the departure of postdoctoral fellows. So the 2024 to 25 Community Engagement Grant helped strengthen the framework to eventually encompass FRC members recording interviews that are incorporated into the oral history, as well as faculty, undergraduate, and graduate student fellows participating with them in conferences and community events. It also helped support the building of a website. So our process was organic and built slowly over time. We would suggest ideas to each other, including, for example, a community event at the Black History Museum, which we held last year, and as well as creating a digital walking tour of important sites related to the East Marshall Street Well project. Through conversations and collaborations with FRC members to determine priorities and plan events, we began the process of actual grant writing. We gathered bios, considered what roles each person would take in the project, shared and revised drafts, and outlined the plans that we had been discussing over a relatively long period of time. So we were fortunate in that, unlike some of the, like the forensic lab, we didn't have to contend with some of these complex questions and issues like around DNA research. And our related scholarly publications are focused primarily on the importance of building community archives and projects that incorporate community members, students, and faculty. So I just tried to, in very broad strokes, uh, give you some context of the scope of the project with the FRC. And I'm going to now turn the mic over to Dr. Dickinson, who'll be able to field questions later in the talk as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shin. And as Chris just mentioned, unfortunately, we had all these beautiful images to show you the sort of, I think it's important to show the people behind our community partnerships. Unfortunately, technology is not my friend today, and so I apologize for that. Um, but what we will talk about in the time remaining is really thinking about how we plan the project. Oh, there we go. Can you all see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. Well, we have visuals to share, if that's okay.
Yeah, that works for us.
Okay, great. Better late than never, I suppose. Okay, can you all see my screen?
It's loading.
Well, while that loads, really at the heart of our projects, we wanted to make sure it was propelled by the community and that our community partners were central to the process of planning our the panels, as Chris just mentioned. A good example of that is, she mentioned the Black History Museum. That was done in collaboration with some of our community partners. That we asked them, where do you think is the most these spaces that will gain the most foot traffic, that will be the most impactful in terms of spreading this history and communicating this history to the community. And the Black History Museum is one of the spaces that they recommended, but also, they actually put us in contact with an individual local historian who's putting together an exhibition that was telling the story of African Americans and medicine in Richmond. And so really we were able to be part of a larger story and gain this larger impact in the community about telling this story. Can you all see my screen now?
No.
No? Okay. So unfortunately, we have to go with still without the images. But if you do are curious about what the timeline looks like, we're happy to provide that after the presentation. And so this community partnership went not only in terms of thinking about spaces where to have these historical panels and these exhibits to tell the story of the well. We also this was part of the oral history piece. Additionally, we collected over 30 interviews of individuals connected to the East Marshall Street Well project since its discovery in 1994. Our community partners were vital to this process, and including helping us find potential people to interview, and also helping us to get responses of folks who are less inclined to respond to our requests. And that's completely understandable given what Dr. Shin outlined as was the fraud and has been the fraud relationship between the Black community of Richmond and the institution, MCV, by extension VCU. And so this is important. Really think about also how we chose an interviewer. We eventually selected Anna Edwards, who was a community activist, but she was given from a list of folks that were given from our community partners as folks that knew this history, that they trusted would help tell this history in terms of interviewing individuals and helping us to find individuals that will be essential in telling this story. And so Anna has been helpful in terms of providing backgrounds on potential folks to interview, providing connections, and identifying people we didn't even think of to interview, did not know would be so essential to this story. And we were able to, in many ways, culminate this in a history archive launch event at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture back in April. And we fully titled the program "Unburying Voices: Community Engaged Reparative Justice." Within this event, we had our community partners presenting, telling this story and history, our students presenting their work, as well as representatives from other community-led efforts to gain to gain redress for historical wrongs dealing with medical racism at universities within Virginia and also beyond Virginia. So I'll leave off in terms of advice by saying that these partnerships can be challenging. Chris mentioned sort of the logistics of it. We're working with folks who have full-time jobs, they have families, they have lives, they have other commitments, and they're also very engaged and a bit understanding that they have other commitments as well, right? And we should also say that developing trust with our community partners was something that was something to be done intentionally, and we worked hard at that. Chris mentioned, having meals and engaging in dialogues and making sure that their voices are heard, and that this trust that has been broken between the community institution that's repaired. And so we can honestly say those challenges were real, but Chris and I are both better for the process. I think I can speak for both of us, and the project is better for the experience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dickinson and Dr. Shin. I don't know if she's still with us, for shining light on the partnerships that you have been able to forge within the East Marshall Street Well Project and how you have used the financial resources to continue that work. We're going to now move on to Nancy Valencia.
I'm just kidding. Hi, everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, hi everybody. My name is Nancy Valencia. I have been working for the last 4 years as a community outreach and engagement and research with the School of Public Health. And this grant, we work with La Casa de la Salud, which is an organization that focuses on Latino health and Latino wellness and different projects related with health prevention, health prevention, disease prevention, and health promotion. So because we had been working for over 4 years together, we were super lucky to know each other for a while. We have the opportunity to discuss what works, what didn't work, what needs to improve, and what we like to see in future research projects. Also, La Casa has, during this time, has worked with another VCU schools, like, for example, the psychology department, and also with Massey and different projects. So this organization already has been starting to understand why research collaborations were so important for the work that we're doing. Again, for many years, they have been focused on health prevention initiatives and health promotion initiatives. And this is an organization that has been doing an amazing work, and just in the last few years is trying to work in research projects to the point that this is a goal for La Casa de la Salud. La Casa de la Salud wants and it is desired, is in his business plan and strategic planning to become a research, to be considered like a serious research partner, not only for VCU, but other organizations. So having that strength, what we call a strength, that opportunity, it was easy for us to discuss the future activities output that we wanted to present in this proposal. Again, the goal, it was clear when long before we already decide to apply for this grant. We already had that discussions. And another strength was that, of course, we shared a cultural alignment. We were coming from Latin America. We understood clearly what is needed to make research culturally appropriate for this community, for this population. And of course, this is what we saw. There is so many things that needs to be are still needed in order to achieve that. So saying that, we have some challenges once to implement our grant. So the main challenge, it was related with what was happening at the School of Public Health, which at the moment, during the process, we were going through the accreditation process, and we were changing from an interim dean to a new dean. So this create like a limbo situation, like many things couldn't be achieved. Not many things, some activities that were proposed in our grant couldn't be achieved. For example, was that we wanted to have a signed term of collaboration between the School of Public Health and La Casa La Salud, and this wasn't achieved. However, a very good draft has been finalized and is available in case La Casa La Salud wants to use it, adapt it, or whatever it's gonna be. Is there for La Casa La Salud to have a collaboration agreement that support best what La Casa La Salud has to offer in terms of community-based research. Also, one of the other challenges during our implementation is like the new government. We experienced federal executive orders, so we had to stop, think, and have conversations about how we're gonna do this one. We're gonna change it, we're gonna drop it, we're gonna propose something else, how we're gonna do. Finally, we were convinced that the material that we wanted to develop during this grant, it was important. We just have to tweak some language, trying to be mindful with the current situation, and this is something that we have to go through. We achieved many things that we considered were mutually beneficial for both organizations. As I mentioned, in terms of strengthening the partnership, it was more about having terms of collaboration between the School of Public Health and La Casa, and also something about a detailed memorandum of understanding about specifically how to do research project between CBO, in this case between La Casa, and other VCU units, departments, on schools. That is something that, again, this is there, it's a draft, but is there for all institutions, for both institutions to use when the moment is right. We also developed what we consider bi-directional learning materials. We developed a 3-part video series about community-based participatory research just focusing for community healthcare workers. And that is bilingual, it's available in English and Spanish. And this is important because as part of this learning process, we consider that La Casa La Salud community health workers needs to understand better why research is important for their overall goals and activities of the organization. We also considering, based on our experience, that the staff and the students of VCU need to have another tool to review the principle of this community-based participatory research, and we develop a training model similar which what human resources use, like I have quizzes and everything, case scenarios, something like that for the students in the School of Public Health or faculty. These two materials were developed by using AI, and this is one of the examples that La Casa brought to this partnership or to this grant, because initially it was planned to do something more like a YouTube a YouTube video, something easy recording, but we are very happy with the quality of the materials achieved thanks to the AI technologies. Other of the things that we were able to achieve is, and it wasn't necessarily included in the proposal, was a survey to explore what was the knowledge about CBPR among the students in the School of Public Health. And that also helped us to guide the materials, the training materials. Finally, we also organize a focus group targeting community health workers, those who are there and those who have been trying to reach out to the community, to do surveys, to do screenings for eligibility. So we went to them and asked them, what would you like that is gonna be different? And with that material, we prepared these sheets that you see, that is community key recommendations from the field. And this is something that hopefully researchers will have the opportunity to considering when they are designing the grants, research grants. We also offer, La Casa is offering an internship. At this moment, they had one MPH student working for La Casa, supporting many other technical other projects. And finally, La Casa was invited to have a guest lecturing opportunity. So this is what we delivered during this year, which it was what some of the things that we proposed weren't completely achieved, but we were provided more activities or more outcomes as part of the changing a little bit as we were implementing the activities and getting feedback and getting recommendations from staff at the School of Public Health. But what I want to really emphasize in my presentation is like the importance of grant like this is not only what we can deliver under the activities proposed, but also what is go beyond this grant. And this is something that we are happy and pleased to have, because both of us have been invited to participate in panelists. For example, this one, as a result of being granted this rush, La Casa was invited to participate in a panel for the last year Science of Community Outreach and Engagement Conference in Oakland, California. Also, La Casa was introduced to the new Dean of School of Public Health. And she has also have expressed that she wants him or La Casa, let's say La Casa La Salud, be involved in future CAPS or CAP, Community Advisory Boards and programs. We also have been featured in many newsletters. And La Casa is currently a member of the MASI COE. Also during that time, La Casa was able to secure a small grant, being like helping MASI with his goal of doing our community outreach and engagement efforts. And finally, I published an article that in many ways have the principle of community-based participatory research, but in the context of abroad Latin American countries. And again, that is something that we consider that is the major gain for organization, gain more visibility, especially for La Casa. That is, again, that his current goal or major future goal is to be considered like a serious partner in research projects. And this is all what I want to share with you guys.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for being so candid about how you manage the challenges that you all encountered and sharing how this grant cycle is not just exclusive to the time parameters that are allotted, but what can happen beyond that time frame. So we really appreciate you being so honest and sharing with us. Now we will hear from Caitlin Schifano. Are you still with us? Where'd she go? Okay, there she is.
I'm right here. Yeah.
Thank
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I am here in Petersburg today. We actually had a Petersburg Wellness Consortium meeting. It's ending in the next minute. So we're excited to be here overall. And when I first saw this call come out, my first step was really to ask the Petersburg Wellness Consortium if this was something that they were interested in pursuing. So I didn't want to get anyone excited about it. Because I needed to know where their bandwidth was and if they were willing to kind of take this next step in our partnership. The Petersburg Wellness Consortium and VCU have been partnering together for years, and it actually came out of a grant that Dr. Mahbouba Masaval had in Petersburg to build the Petersburg Wellness Consortium. And so they were very familiar with research in general and working with VCU. But what we had seen post-COVID was a little bit of a decrease in our VCU partnership. And I was concerned that the partnership was becoming a little bit more individual-based instead of institution-based. And I expressed this concern with the organization. And so when we were thinking about what we could achieve in this, we were looking at our strategic plan and we were seeing how can we build VCU's participation back into the Petersburg Wellness Consortium so that more researchers would be willing to collaborate with PwC and build it beyond the individual and more towards the institution. So that's where we came from when we were putting in this grant. And when we were thinking about how we were going to do that, we wanted to really think of some activities and objectives that would get VCU to come to our meetings and get the researchers who are here to get excited about working with the Petersburg Wellness Consortium again. So that was one of our main objectives. And then what surprised me when we were writing the grant was other members of the board continuing saying, that's great, that's building the PwC, but what are we doing for VCU? How are we adding? How are we promoting the organization and showing that communities can really build upon research? And so I was looking into the literature on the science of community engagement. And we had seen some things come out of Petersburg framed in a negative light in general. This is something that always happens in communities, right? About mistrust. And there was all of this mistrust in the community when it came to medical and institutions. And we thought, how can we prove that there is trust as well? So we found a measure that was about trust in community organizations. And that's what we decided to do for all of our projects. We were going to implement a really brief survey to see if we had trust with the people who were coming to our meetings or our events or participating in our activities. So we used this trust scale and we asked each in person to answer the questions, what is your trust in VCU? What is your trust in another one of our key partners, the Crater Health District? And what is your trust with the Petersburg Wellness Consortium? And what we're seeing from the preliminary data, everything's not analyzed yet, just to be clear, is that people have much more trust in the Petersburg Wellness Consortium than they do in VCU or the VDH Crater Health District. And so now we're able to say, like, we really are stronger when we're together. We really are making a difference through these collaborations. These are things that we already knew, but there wasn't the research to back it up. And what's made this grant and partnership awesome is that now we're able to use that to continue to grow our relationship and put in for grants. So we're able to show this data that the Petersburg Wellness Consortium is able to reach people and have a level of trust with people that we wouldn't have had otherwise without the existence of that organization. And we can leverage that partnership. Another one of the goals that we put in this project was to get a 501c3 for the Petersburg Wellness Consortium because they also identified that as a limitation of being able to build the partnerships further. And so getting that 501c3 has now allowed them to stand on their own financial 2 feet. They don't rely on any other organizations. They're able to support some of the smaller organizations in the community and now are able to put in for their own grant funding and fundraise for themselves and have these opportunities to have income going in, so the Petersburg Wellness Consortium won't go away. So VCU can continue to partner with them, so the VDH can continue to get their message out through the organization as a whole. So we're really have been very excited and reinvigorated by this partnership. We have seen that since we started it, our membership has gone up, our participation and activities have gone up. We've restarted conversations about research and the connections we can make with researchers in the community. So it's been really great. And as Nancy mentioned in her presentation, so now one of the PwC members is also on the community advisory board for Massey. Everybody is downstairs right now talking about what the Petersburg Wellness Consortium strategic priorities are going to be related to the Regional Health Improvement Plan, and now also in related to the Massey's strategic plan. So we're seeing that they are asking these questions and becoming more involved in the processes on both sides. So I really think that this funding was pivotal in making the group think a little bit more strategically and putting them in a place for success moving forward. So we did a few different activities throughout the year, including inviting students to come, doing like hands-on volunteer opportunities, as well as bringing researchers to the community to give presentations on their research. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has on those specific details. But overall, if you're on the fence, apply. You should apply for this. It's worth it, even just learning more about the group when you're going through. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for encouraging everyone to apply and sharing how you can strengthen partnerships that were already established and how you can deepen those partnerships. So we really appreciate hearing from you in that regard, as well as all of the other wonderful information you have shared. Now we will hear from Dr. Marsha Winter. Here we are.
Thank you, Shalyn. Let me share my screen. Adjust some stuff so I can see. Sorry that I have to talk out loud as I do things. I don't know why my brain needs that, but it does apparently. So I'm so excited to be here to share, and I'll echo what Caitlin said. This has been a very pivotal grant for me. I often refer to it as the best small amount of money I've ever gotten. So, it's not a ton of money, but it's made a huge difference in my partnership and in my work. So I'm with you, Caitlin, on encouraging folks to apply for this if you're on the fence. Also, because working with Dr. Mosabel, Challen, and people over in the community engagement is always a joy, and they're always so helpful. So I want to talk to you about the partnership that I built with this grant called the Building Wealth and Health Network, which is a trauma-informed financial empowerment program for low-income families in Richmond. And I'll give you just a brief history of this program. This program started probably we started talking about it probably back in like 2021 or 2022. I don't know. It's been a while. And Mr. Stephen Batchy from the Salvation Army Central Virginia Area Command kind of cold called me. I found me somehow and was like, will you help us with this thing? And I helped them with that thing. And then he said, you know what else I want to do is this. And I said, I don't know anything about financial programming. I barely balance my own checkbook, but I do know about families and trauma and poverty. So anyway, we talked about it and we started to think about how are we going to establish this partnership? How are we going to bring this particular program that has been working very well in Philadelphia for many years to Richmond? And how are we going to do that in a way that's very community engaged, that doesn't presume that Richmond is a photocopy of Philadelphia? And how are we going to do this in ways that are responsive? And so I'll talk to you about writing the grant, and then I'm going to go back to sort of how we identified the community needs. So first of all, in terms of developing the grant proposal itself, I actually found this to be kind of challenging because I wanted to work with the partner to actually write the grant proposal and to write the goals. And at first, I started out by sort of defining the roles like, oh, I'll write the whole thing if you just tell me what your up to kind of thing. And he's like, I know how to write grants, right? I do this all the time. And I was like, academics, we're so like goofy. But he sort of informed me, like, let me help you write. And I was like, yes, please, I'd love it. So, I was lucky that he really wanted to dig into that with me. But we first started by just writing the goals. And, spoiler alert, our goals weren't always the same. So we had to make sure to define that. And a couple of things that I did that I think were helpful in writing the grant was I shared all of the meeting notes and the files right from the start. So we had a common place that we worked from. And so that was really important. I also had to dust off like my old clinical psychology skills and like use my active listening. I repeated a lot. Oh, Stephen, I hear you saying that the Salvation Army needs this. Did I understand that correctly? Which was maybe half of the time I understood it correctly, and the other half he said to correct me, right? But ultimately, I think we came up with a set of goals that were common and 100% shared. I will claim 100% on that. I also tried to get myself in the habit of always asking the community partner, to speak first, because I found that if I said something, sometimes they would defer to me, and I didn't want that. I wanted to hear what they had to say first and then bring in my opinion, because otherwise I would start to do things the way that I've always done things, and that's not best practices for community engaged work. So we came up with sort of the set of goals, which we wanted to launch the programming in Richmond. That was one thing. And we were working on that, getting funding through the city of Richmond for that. But we also needed to test the feasibility, acceptability, the sort of initial efficacy of this programming. And we sort of needed to determine how to do that while meeting community and academic needs. And that's sort of the goals that we came up with for this grant itself, was to kind of like establish those types of things. And so that was sort of like laid the groundwork for what we were doing. But I'm going to go back just in time for a minute and talk about how we identified the community needs, because this really happened prior to writing the grant. We did have to really nail those down during writing the grant, but it kind of happened prior to that. And really, again, he kind of cold called me and said, I want to bring this program here. How do I do it? And then I had to start talking about program evaluation and him proving stuff so that he could get further funding and things. So, but it took quite a bit of time and work. And so I always sort of caution people that it's going to be a lot of legwork. Like we spent a whole summer just going around to different agencies in Richmond that are already doing work in this space and talking to them and figuring out the needs, because I don't think he knew the community needs well enough. And I certainly didn't. So we had to do that. And we realized that those needs obviously went well beyond the two of us in our agencies, right? And also that the needs change over time. And so that was one of the things that it was a moving target. And so, we had to do that. And so after we established those community needs, we really talked about academic needs. And I credit my partner, Stephen, for always bringing that up, because he was very concerned that what will you need to get out of this? What do your students who are helping on this project need to get out of this, right? And I really appreciate him for that, because he knew that symbiosis was the way to make this work, right? And he was better at this than me, and he knew. And we found a lot of overlaps and commonalities and really focused on them. And from there, we defined the roles, right? What we would all do going forward, and importantly, how we would monitor how things were going. And I don't know if I wrote that into the grant application, but I wish that I had. I wish I had put like, how are we going to monitor these things? The other thing that I did for myself, because my memory is lousy, is that I kept those community needs and goals at the top of my meeting notes page, which I opened up for every meeting that we were there, and I had them in like red. And so I had to keep my eye on that prize, and like from the very start, that helped me really stick to that and not let my own sort of knee-jerk academic reactions kind of, take hold of me, as they will. And so I'll just wrap up with a couple of sort of advantages that I found of this and lessons. A key advantage of this grant, I'm just going to say it, was the money, because that money allowed us to collect some data we couldn't have otherwise, qualitative data that we really, really needed, and to pay participants. So I'm super appreciative of that. It also made us really focus in on some of our questions if we have to write those interviews, of course, right? We also tended to use the grant application as an ongoing guide. And I think I wish I had been a little more detailed in parts of the grant application because we did use it this way, right? We would return to it and be like, wait, what did we say we were going to do? Let's revisit that. And then I'll give you a few lessons that I learned. One was to keep talking and keep asking if it's working or if changes are needed. We tried to open most meetings with that because most of the time changes were needed because things weren't as smooth as we wanted them to be. They never are. I think also think about the history and reputation of VCU and the community. We've heard a couple people already talk about that today, so they super helped me. But I got a lot of pushback from a lot of the community partners that we were partnering with. I mean, it was embarrassing and humbling and full of lots of emotions for me. I'm going to give you, though, a really quick win. One of the people that pushed back the most against VCU and research asked me in December to come to her organization and help them. And I start tearing up every time I say it because it's such a big win. And I hope I helped our reputation because I listened and I owned it and I humbled it. And so that was big. And also consider what happens if there are changes beyond your control. That's my advice for all of you, because in the midst, this grant was mostly over, but my partner actually was let go from the Salvation Army for budget cuts, right? And if we're working with community agencies, budget cuts are a whole thing. And it broke my heart and kind of broke his heart. And, and the person who came in, who's lovely, maybe isn't as invested in this though. And so that's been an ongoing now conversation that we're still working through, but it is something that for some goofy reason I never considered, right? That maybe it wouldn't be the next person's passion project. Maybe they wouldn't have the heart and love it as much as Stephen and I did. And so kind of keep that in mind and make sure that you've kind of got that in the back of your head, that there are things that can happen outside of your control and what might happen then. Can you maybe I could have established a closer relationship with the agency and not relied on one person, for example. So I will end it there and take any questions here or by email later if anybody has them.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. You dropped so many gems. We love to hear that. There's such practical advice in your presentation. Truly, keeping community goals and needs at the top of every meeting's notes is something that I will personally be doing and adding to my practice. So thank you. We will now hear from Dr. Sean Jones. Okay, there he is.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Wellington. And it's an honor to go after Dr. Winter, who dropped so many gems. I'll do my best in our allotted time to not rehash some of those, but to share a little bit about the experience here. One thing I was reflecting on as I was hearing my colleagues present was the notion of what happens to a partnership that is really forged for the first time. And so I think that's one of the things here that I would like to share some maybe unique things on for those of you all who may be here this afternoon saying, oh, well, I don't have the partnership backing of, the School of Public Health or a longer standing connection in the East Marshall Well Project or what have you. And that in that way, I will say Sawubona, which is actually one of our parts of shared governance that I'll share in a moment. I see you because, and for this particular partnership planning grant, it really existed between a research team here in the psychology department at VCU and a community aligned partner where we were mutually trying to see one another and make a difference. And so I would just want to encourage that as I share a little bit about the partnership forged between the Hive and our team, the Aya Collective. You all can see my screen, right? Just want to make sure. Okay, yes. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so just a little bit about the Hive, our partner The Hive helps young people and emerging adults successfully transition into adulthood. One of their taglines is imagining a world without youth prisons and incarcerations, coming out of some of the great folks. If you know Trey Hart, Gina Lyles, folks in the Richmond community connecting to performance statistics, Art 180 for a long time, right? The Hive movement, they are those folks as well. And so, really, this uh, relationship and partnership really started off as genuine, authentic, low stakes individual connections between myself and some of the folks who were part of the Hive, and particularly want to shout out Kim Young. Um, and so really started off knowing an individual for a number of years, sitting at similar tables, using our collective wisdom to think about things like, um, you know, violence prevention in the city, et cetera, and so forth. And that was able to beautifully transition through the support of this grant into a more synergistic partnership. So again, not out of a notice for funding. We did not start coming to the table from understanding that this grant existed, but rather the relationships preceded this experience, as so many folks shared. And so we were able to really kind of align on some similar pieces that we both, between Aya and the Hive, we both kind of saw the world and certain problems in a similar way. And I don't want to undersell the value of that, because I think it can, of course, you can have partnership that is sustained and equitable, where you grow into reaching those shared goals and shared alignment, as Dr. Winter just alluded to. It helped a lot that we had a great Venn diagram of overlap in our approach to seeing Black youth and family resistance and resilience and resistance, right? Through the lens of strength, right? Through the lens of resistance, right? And so I think that helped a lot. It certainly was not a panacea, but certainly was vital for us. I think another big important part to that end is that both of our organizations, both of our entities, both really grounded ourselves in core African centered values, one of which you see on the screen is Ujima. If you know Kwanzaa, it's one of the principles here, right? Collective work and responsibility. And so we, like Dr. Winter noted, we wrote this planning grant together. And that was something that we mutually agreed upon. We strove to ensure consensus and harmony throughout. And that striving took striving. One of the things I am grateful for that I think I said before for this particular grant is the ability to break bread. And that was in the budget. We had a bread breaking budget, right? As a part of the line item. Why? Because the idea of commensality, of eating together, of sitting together, of coming together was really key for us to be able to engage in some of the objectives that we came to and had. One example of this equity in practice was also in the budget itself. So I just talked about that bread breaking budget item. That was something I can't take credit for. That came from the Hive. They're like, we got to eat together, right? We have to eat, sit, be well together in order for this thing to work, right? And so the idea of even developing the project budget together to make sure that all labor was adequately compensated, not just in terms of partners at the Hive, but also importantly, as I'll share in terms of our methodology in a second, our kind of key informants, and you'll see the special name we have for them. And then again, this is the developmental process. So for me, I have to own, right? I was not, I know one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, used to the crafting and development of MOUs. However, through this process, right, one of the things that the Hive was really intentional in bringing us along was crafting SOWs and MOUs. And that process, I grew a lot in that, but I think it helped me. It certainly helped my graduate students to also sit in on that process, because again, that was novel for us on the academic side as a team overall. In terms of our planning activities, we started with, as many folks have said, identifying the need, right? So the big needs assessment that came, I talked about sitting at these different tables with Kim Young for years, and she at the time was um, the program manager for the Hive. And we ultimately came to this idea of how can we think of culturally responsive, community-based alternatives, diversion, if we want to call it that, preventative arms. And I so happened in my academic partnerships to know of a program that I thought might fit the bill. And so we came together. I humbly presented that as one of several options. And the folks at the Hive were really kind of locked into like this could really be useful with some work, right? And so we set out to take an intervention that I'll mention in a moment and really try to think about how we could regionalize it and make it developmentally relevant for the needs of Black youth and families, 15 to 17 and emerging adults in the city of Richmond. We were able to do that utilizing a wisdom keeper circle methodology. You may be saying, what is a wisdom keeper circle? Um, it is a way to honor the labor of folks who we might call being part of focus groups, right? But we were really intentional again in that nomenclature, again in the way in which we engage folks in that process, et cetera, and so forth, right? I see my time, so I'm sorry if I'm rushing through things, and I'll be happy to answer any pieces about this at a later time, but I want to make sure I get to my final slide. And then again, the intervention that I alluded to is called engaging, managing, and bonding through race. And so that was an existing intervention that my colleague, Dr. Rihanna Anderson, had already developed, but was so gracious to allow us to really break the intervention apart and think about ways through our synergistic activities that we might be able to put it back together to fit, again, the needs, the unique needs of justice involved youth in Richmond. And so that was really powerful. And then to also engage her in the sustainability part of a train the trainer model. So to get her to buy into a train the trainer model, whereby the Hive would be a recognized site that could train other folks in the city to provide the Embrace program. Again, utilizing a holistic care model as well as expertise to create sustainable youth development. So in my last minute, I'll just talk quickly about shared ownership, challenges, and future directions. Again, I mentioned that notion of Sawubona as well as the notion of Ubuntu, right? This kind of symbiotic coexistence, right? The notion of reciprocal dissemination. So that was something that was really important to, again, to make sure that the folks in the Hive, though not researchers by their own admission, certainly were co-researchers in the process. I think that was super important. And then lastly, just in terms of some quick challenges, there were a lot of, as some other folks have alluded to, changes in key staff, including my road dog, Kim Young, who rotated out of the role in the middle of the grant. And so getting reacclimated, and organization in motion stays in motion. There were a lot of other things that the Hive were trying to do, and this was one part of it. So trying to understand ourselves in that constellation of a visionary entity. And then also this notion that the future is ever evolving, right? In fact, in a similar way, right, Hive is in a moment now where they're sitting still in reflection. And so although we had continued our sustainable partnership past the ending of the grant, we're currently in a holding pattern as we respect, and Aya, what the Hive is trying to imagine themselves to do in this current climate and season. So trust, patience, and grace. Thank you so much for your time. Sorry for going over.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And you truly dropped a gem with breaking bread and adding that into a proposal. I think everyone here can say that they really appreciated that nugget there. So we want to hear from our last speaker, Dr. Dave Saavedra. He's still with us. And thank you all for remaining with us throughout the time. I do appreciate your presence here.
All right, thank you very much. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to share my screen. I do have a slide deck that I'm happy to forward to folks for a little more detail if they like it. But kind of the the main thing I wanted to talk about, so our project in the School of Education, and our project was a partnership with the Richmond Public Schools. It was an exploratory partnership, trying to figure out what we might actually work on together in kind of more depth. So kind of three main insights that kind of we walked away from with this was first is inquire. Like someone needs to ask the question if we would like to have a partnership. Someone needs to kind of broach the issue, and this all started because someone from Richmond Public Schools emailed someone at the School of Education and just asked for a meeting to talk about potentials of what we might possibly do to work together. And from that, we kind of other folks were brought in from both sides, and we kind of formed this group and decided that the grant was something to really apply for. Another thing that we really learned, and I think this is echoing a lot of what's been said already, is the value of kind of mutual expertise. So that kind of recognizing the expertise and knowledge and skills that everybody is bringing to the table, and that when you get everybody together, it's the whole is kind of greater than the sum of its parts. So you're able to do a lot more and think a lot more deeply when you've got people with different backgrounds working together. And then the last thing is kind of flexibility and openness. We, over the course of everything, we got together, we worked together to write our grant mutually, and thought we had a really good plan and a really good focus, which was improving, trying to think about how potentially to improve graduation rates and post-secondary pathways for multilingual students in the Richmond Public Schools. And even with all of that great work and thinking through the grant writing process, when we actually got to doing the work together, we realized that certain ideas were just coming up over and over again, and that our shift and what we thought was most important started to shift, and we really focused more on family engagement as a way to support multilingual learners and multilingual students. And so kind of being open to the fact that as you start to work together, what you think is your goal might actually change as you go along, and really leaning into that process, because you can really kind of come out the other end with a much stronger understanding of what you want to do and what you want to pursue. And that helped us, that whole process helped us in putting together a proposal for a much larger grant, which we're still waiting to hear from, but which would allow the work to continue for another 3 years together.
Thank you, Dr. Savidra. Fingers crossed for you that you get the next grant. This sounds like amazing work. And thank you to all of our presenters today for sharing how they have encountered challenges and overcome them, as well as some of the lessons learned along the way that maybe didn't arise during the initial planning processes. So,
Shannon, can I just add something?
absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt. I'll echo what Sheldon said. Just thank you so much. When this mechanism became available, of course, you had hopes and dreams of what it could do. But I think listening to each of you and your projects and what you've been able to achieve, I think it surpasses what I might have expected, because you've all in your own unique way demonstrated the power of intention and dedicated effort that is required to build, sustain, maintain, and leverage these partnerships for even greater impact. So I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, Dr. Savidra, you had to go short, but I mean, even in what you have said, all of you, it's just been so impactful. And I hope to create another opportunity for you to come together so that more people can benefit from your work. Because one of the other reasons for this grant opportunity is all of you write grants, and you understand that there's not often dedicated funds to just focus on building your partnership. And that the building of the partnership itself is scholarship. And you've demonstrated that. Not only is it scholarship, but it's also impact. And you can do more because you've done the front work, and some of you have had those relationships, but you strengthened those relationships. So I truly, as a community engaged scholar myself, I think your work in this space and with this grant has been exemplary. And I hope this is not the last time that others outside of your team or field will hear what you have to say. So I just want to thank you for your participation today. And we certainly could have benefited with more time, because you have so much more to say, I'm sure. But thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. And thank you for demonstrating that this grant works and is needed. And I hope more people will apply in the future. Well, the grant we have, when is it due?
It's
I don't
due
remember.
March 27th. So that was what I was going to say. You have a little bit over a month. So if you have folks that are interested, encourage them to apply. As you all can see, we have past recipients from multiple academic disciplines across faculty and staff levels. So we really encourage folks to apply. March 27th is the deadline, and all of the details are on our website that Ms. Suka will link for us in the chat. I will also send all of this information in a follow-up email. I know our time has been short, so thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Nancy. Great work. Thank you, Caitlin. Great work. Representing our staff.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.